listening, I think, for American would be something. A lot of times, that's all they want to do. Listen. We're not looking for advice truly. A lot of times, our advice isn't help anyone. They're going through life, they're going through struggles. Just had this not too long ago, where someone came in and they're talking about some struggles that they're having. Really, I didn't have any discussion. They're like, oh, if you do this, oh, so I am maturity and take that person down. Oh, so I didn't have a point. All I was able to do was listen to them. And after they were thankful that they would listen without saying anything. And that was one of the things that they said, is they're kind of talking to me about the situation. All they've given me is advice that I can't give you. And they just listen. Sometimes listening is practice. You guys all heard this, right? No? Listen twice as much?
Yeah.
I've heard that too. The reason I heard that is so you guys are all the same. Alright? Alright. This is in Mark chapter 8, verse 34. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone come after me, let him deny himself. I don't know what in America is really taking. Like, what does it really mean? In the conference yesterday, one of the things that stood out to me, all of them, probably, I don't know who the most famous people are, the most famous guy, right? Then him that, Maxwell was there. That guy's the one who was, but the one thing that they talked a lot about was, the market, having the ministry of the market. Now, granted, it was here for some programs that they had. That stood out to me because, that was one of the things that I did as minister, as pastor. We're not that, because everybody you know is a Christian. My friends are Christians, my other pastor friends I go through advice are Christians, everybody in my church is Christians. I'm really not into the marketplace. Now you can do something about that. We're do something with it. Some pastors do. Just say, oh, I'm just fortunate to be able to do that as well. But most pastors don't. Now I'm not saying it's their fault. It's just, you got to take a church, you got to have responsibilities, whatever the case may be. But you guys are in the marketplace. Right? You guys have the opportunity to represent God in your actions more than your words. Right? More than your words. A lot of times when I tell people, oh, this is what you should do. So this happened yesterday, and it just stood out to me. Actually, it stood out to me yesterday and then this morning. Right? Don't know why this was significant. Maybe it means something to somebody here. But when we drove back, Chris and I, we stopped off at Richmond. We got coffee. And we rotated people with food. When at the top of the bar, the person was helping me was a transgender person who's doing the band. He's from the little class. It was very more like a woman. Very strong masculine voice. Right? And I didn't do anything like out of the way, but I did notice myself halfway through that it was nice to me. You know what I mean? I don't agree with the lifestyle, and I'm not saying that that's the way they should live. But after I left, I thought, what? Maybe that's not a Christian. I think missing God, just whatever. But I think that's the way we should treat people, even if they're doing something that we don't agree with, right? But there are some times where, like you said about people who do that, things bad. Like, so, but we need to learn to treat people because that's the way as a Christian we're going to be able to win people over and influence them eventually. And I may not be that person at that particular time that had the opportunity to present itself. But I thought about that, and I was talking to Brian this morning. Jesus, the Son, I didn't know it was what. I was a man. And I thought, this person is that important. We're going to talk to nobody in this foreign domain. I should listen. And I listened, and I gave myself to Christ that night. And now I have a church history. But we don't know what the outcome is. But have the ability enough to say, this is what God asked me to do, so I'm going to step up and do it regardless of what I see. Right? I think that is important. That's what God wants us to do, is to serve Him regardless of what we see. But what we should do is what we have to do. Too many people want to be comfortable, right? And that's a fact. I see it in the church all the time. I mean, you know, hey, will somebody do this in the church, right? Let's go to the years I've been here where we've been. Now, I'll give you the best example. If we had children, right? This was quite a few years ago, the children, and we needed help with children's ministry. We asked for help. We had 5 volunteers, so it worked out. We could rotate, administration could rotate. So 6 volunteers were able to rotate them with 1 person each week, so everybody would only have to do it once every 6 weeks, right? So we did that. But then, after they all volunteered, not one person actually showed up, right? We had people missing when the day that they were supposed to be teaching, but people saying, well, I'm not ready yet. I'm going to wait till in the summer, in July, right? And then they'll put every excuse in the world, and it was just frustrating because it's like, I need help. You're saying yes, but you're actually not doing it, right? That doesn't give us service to Christ. They had trouble one time when you were at the pastor's meeting. Actually, I got really fucking tacked all of a sudden. It was something about doing groundwork. I'm like, you know, when you volunteer at the church to do something, and actually I was talking about mowing the lawn at the time, but I told them this mow the lawn. This is falling to the ground. Right? And that was in my mind. But I was like, you know, when you say you're going to do something for the pastor, or the church and the ministry, if you will, right? I mean, that's all from the church. You're really saying yes to God. I'm going to go do this service, this act of service, right? And when you don't do it, yeah, you might disappoint the pastor, but to me, you're not saying no to God. And you're disappointing God. Anyways, I got backlash, man. You just knife thrown at me. I was having a block and everything. But they were saying that I was manipulating people. Well, funny for the record, so in the courts, you need to look at the sex change. Right? And you say, well, these are experiences, and they're going to go, this is sad. No? These are the lowest level sex offenders. And he said, you know, well, I was young, and, you know, the person was younger than he was, so there was some others for the story. He goes, but then they upped it to level 3. And I don't know which way it is. Level 3 is higher than level 1, whatever the highest level, right? And he goes, because I was homeless. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Right? It doesn't. You know, I don't look up the record that way. That it's committed murder, or you have a traffic ticket, you take a fine, but they don't look it up. In case you don't know this, it doesn't matter. You could be a murderer in the jail, okay? To be a low-class offender that's in the regular station with what they call pop, right? It's not about your crime, it's about your law. Make sense? Okay? So you literally can have that situation where someone is violent, criminal officer, here we get along with the jail for the reason, put them in there. Okay? Well, this person was talking to me, and telling me the situation that they're in, he can't find housing. He wants my help with housing. is the blessing when you help somebody, right? Right? Here's probably one of the stronger blessings that we get is when you're out on the street, maybe this isn't you guys, okay, but I've had this happen a few times where I'm out there, for whatever reason, talk to somebody, kind of bless them financially, right? One of the rules is that I'm giving whatever, right? Bless them financially. I have people way with less money and that. That's what blessing is. He honors you. He's not gonna, like all of a sudden you show up at your house and you're on the bus. He blesses us with wisdom, right? You know, at a conference yesterday, I mean, excellent. And the one pastor there, he said, yes, but it's been what I'm going to do. Anyway, so he really felt God moving on him to sell a business person, right? But he starts selling Tupperware online, right? And his wife was like, this is not going to work out. That's a trip, but he just sell more Tupperware. But he felt like this is what God asked him to do. You know? Just act now on what God asked you, right? Action really is important. Let's say, all right, let's say you go do something, whatever it is, I don't care, but it's in honor of God. Fair enough? Not violating any of God's principles, you're not sinning, not doing anything immoral, you're not getting mad and saying, oh, Jesus, right? Right? You're honoring God in what you did. It doesn't work out, God didn't ask you to do it, the person gets mad at you, you're wrong. You're not wrong. It was like when I first started preaching here, and when I was over the little church, I used to wear a prayer. I put that in the house, you know, preach church. And when Chris and I first come back to do it, we had to here. And outside, not because we don't want to continue. It's just I felt that I was more connected to God. I knew there wasn't anything special about the church. I knew that wasn't like elevated, you know, all of a sudden now I'm more spiritual, I'm more important. But it didn't help. Right? Then I had someone come criticize me for the song that provide, well, were you Jewish? You know, they were like, keep in mind, they're Christian. Right? If they come up and they're like, what, are you Jewish or something? I'm like, no, well, then why are you wearing that, right? And I actually do, right? Like, because I like to. Like, that's kind of it. That's the reason, right? And then they were saying, well, I can't remember exactly. They're criticizing me for it. But finally I said, what is wrong with me wearing it if it makes me feel more connected to God? Not just so people see me. It's already maybe thought that I did it. Okay. I said, but I'm not doing it with it. I said, I would go in the hell. I feel more spiritual. I feel, you know, I'm feeling God better. I mean, I don't know. I know nothing about that, but that's me. You know, it's like that thing I made over the written out of the baby when I prayed. The reason I asked for that is, and I got really feel for that. You know, you Catholic? I don't know. I have knee problems, right? And when I prayed in here, it's like 4 minutes, I'm in pain, and I'm thinking, oh, pain, not praying there. I pray, right? You know, those things are okay. But it's not okay acting about the Bible. That's it. God's sitting back and waiting, and God says, hey, what do you know? And he puts desires in your life. Today, the whole world is about what? Power. Look at me, right? They want status. Maybe that's the YouTube influence. Maybe it all. But it's funny because afterwards, the book, the brothers, right? And Teresa had mine, and then we had the others. We're in the waiting in this room. Now, the one guy, they didn't advertise there, right? They said they won't advertise because they're afraid of what it said. Well, because he was, you know, I can do it. Hey, I'm let it through. He's talking about, you got a man person, I'm a man, you know, or all this stuff. Right? I'm like, okay, I mean, but I was like, he had a line out God didn't call us to be enemies. I like this group of people only, but if you don't fit within that, and you have leprosy, I'm not touching it. Okay? Here today, we have a lot of wisdom. Certain people are not. So you're not supposed to help them? Right? Are they not redeemable? They're not. We had a talk on Sunday not too long ago. They were like, I don't know if that person ever actually got saved. Said they did. That's years ago, you know. And there was a question on the way out. They got up on the title of the truth. You know? Okay, if you're on a tree, and you're looking really good, and the fruit's really ripe, right? You still might have some bad. It's like, you have a really nice watermelon, like a house, that's on the tree. So those things happen. So when we're talking about fruit of the tree, it's the longevity. What do you look like over time? Right? Because it may look pretty for a moment. Right? I remember one time, this is when I was young, where we were out and we were just friends of us were going out and we were all entertaining ourselves. And this one lady, she was very attractive lady, all our age, and we all crashed out of this house together, not like here, it's all so silly. Well, the next morning we woke up and I was like, who's this new person? And they were like, what? It was like, oh my God, where'd you come from, right? You know, we can put on makeup, right? The Christians can put on not physical makeup, but put on makeup to look good, right? People can do that all the time. But if you watch them, you know that they're all good. Others can't. Are they truly this person that they say they are? They don't get better, they can't. And we've experienced that. I probably would say that's probably one of the bigger mistakes I've made as a Christian. Right? This is, okay, if you guys ever owned businesses, this is what you do. You get, now, this is what I say, right? Talk too much, right? So, you get an application, and you get a resume. The first thing I know about the resume is that it's true. They're just telling me how great they are. Right? I mean, it's true, but it's inflated truth. Does that make sense? Right? And then you get them hired, now they're working for you, and you're like, oh no. But you get that resume. Right? You know? So this is ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So, you know, those are inflated. Right? So, but when you know someone for a period of time, they can't fix it. And we see that in life where even the Son of Man, he didn't come to be served, he came to serve. And when you're trying to be something that you're not, right? So in other words, for a period of time, eventually it comes out. And I've seen that in ministry, I've seen it in church, seen it where I've made mistakes. It's like, hey, if I give this person this responsibility, well, they have to do it real well before them, but because they're going to step up, well, whatever. So, understanding that. Now, I'm not saying it's for bad people, or I was one of them. Like, this is do more. So, there was me. We got a little video here.
The Gospel of Mark is a book in the Bible about the life of Jesus. And the earliest reliable tradition tells us that it was written by a guy named John Mark.
Now, Mark didn't just grab a bunch of random stories about Jesus and throw them together. He's designed this book to address some really specific questions about whether or not Jesus was the Jewish Messiah.
So let's stop right there, because that's a term a lot of people like me aren't very familiar with.
Yeah, so the Messiah was a royal figure, sometimes called the Son of God, that Israel was expecting to come and set up a kingdom here on earth. And around the time of Jesus, Israel was occupied by Rome, and so many Jews were hoping that the Messiah would come and overthrow the Romans and rule as king.
But Jesus didn't overthrow the Romans. In fact, he was killed by them.
And that brings us to the very issues Mark is trying to get at in this book. So in the first half, he focuses on who Jesus is. Is he really the Messiah? And then in the second half, he's addressing how Jesus became the Messianic king. And then right here in the middle of the book is this pivotal story that brings the two halves together, and Jesus answers both of these questions.
Okay, so let's talk about the first half of the book, who Jesus is.
So Mark makes his beliefs about Jesus very clear from the first line of the book. The beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God.
One of the next stories is Jesus getting baptized, and God's voice announces from heaven, "This is my son." So it couldn't be more clear. It's presenting Jesus as the Messiah.
Yes, but as you're reading through this first half of Mark, you'll notice something really interesting start to happen. Jesus is going about healing all these different people, and he's constantly telling them to keep quiet about who he is. This happens so many times in Mark's account, it's very strange.
Yeah, why keep it a secret?
So remember, lots of Jews had lots of different expectations about what the Messiah would be and do. And so Jesus doesn't want people to misunderstand what it means for him to be Israel's Messiah. And so with all that in mind, we come now to the pivotal story at the center of the book, where Jesus takes his disciples away and he asks them, "Who do you all say that I am?"
And Peter says what everyone's been saying, "You're the Messiah, the Son of God."
But then something new happens, because Jesus starts explaining to them how he's going to become the Messianic king, and it is not what they expected. He says he's going to suffer and die and rule by becoming a servant, or in his words, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to become a servant and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Peter is startled by this and he rebukes Jesus because there's no way he's going to let Jesus die. And Jesus responds, "Get behind me, Satan," which is really intense.
It really is. But it highlights how important it is for Jesus that his disciples come to understand who he really is. And so here, now in this pivotal section, Jesus tries 3 different times to have this conversation with them, and every time they respond in confusion and even fear.
Okay, so this launches us into the second half of the book, where Mark addresses the question of how Jesus becomes the Messianic king. It's the last week of Jesus' life. He goes to Jerusalem, gets in conflict with the religious leaders, and gets arrested.
And he's put on trial as someone who's claiming to be the king of the Jews. He's even given a crown and a purple robe like a king would get, but it is all a cruel joke.
Then he's mocked and beaten and hung up on a cross where he dies.
And it's here in this crucial scene that we meet a new character,
A Roman soldier.
who suddenly gets everything that's going on.
He says, "Surely this is the Son of God."
Which is crazy. It's an enemy who's first putting it all together, that Israel's messianic king is the crucified Jesus.
That's the structure of the book of Mark. But the book doesn't end with Jesus dead on the cross.
No. So on the 3rd day, some women go to visit Jesus' tomb, only to find that it's empty. And then there's this angel standing there, instructing them to go and tell this good news that Jesus is alive from the dead. But instead, they run away and they don't tell anyone because they're afraid, and that's how the book ends.
Which is a really abrupt ending.
Yeah, it's so abrupt that later scribes did add an ending that brings more closure to the story. And you'll find that story in your Bible with a little footnote that says it was added much later. But Mark's a brilliant storyteller, and he's intentionally ended this book abruptly. So all through the book, the disciples have been confused about Jesus' plan to give up his life, the story in the middle, and now right here at the end. It's like Mark is acknowledging just how startling this claim really is. And he wants you, the reader, to wrestle with it for yourself. Is this crucified Jesus really the Messiah that they've been waiting for?
up out of the water, he immediately, notice what, I love the capitalization immediately because 40 different times, Mark talks about immediately. These things happened immediately. This is what happened immediately. Even after he come up out of the water, he immediately went to the desert. He immediately went and started his services. He started healing people. All these things, he immediately started doing these things. He's not waiting around. So we don't need to wait around to serve God and to serve other people for something to happen. What we need to do is just go do it, right? As long as it's within the boundaries of who God is, and what I mean by that is it holy, is it righteous? Are you doing good for your man? Mankind is not man. Right? Are you doing good for humanity? Right? And this is representing God's holiness, righteousness. So if it's going to the restaurant, sitting down, and tipping your waitress extra money, right? Hopefully you put, the price to the national food, that money to the, I'd love to, nevertheless, but that was a process for me, right? But if you listen to that, we're still sharing the gospel, we're serving somebody's needs, but you don't know what that is. The best story I ever had is when I finally found out what this person needed, right? And I wrote share this story, but it's been a long time. We went to Jared, now it's like, they went on the wall. We went there for lunch and met Teresa's sister and her husband there and all that. So we went in there, they were there before us, and we had lunch or whatever it was, lunch breakfast or whatever. When we left, I put on my heart to tip the waitress $100, right? They tipped the waitress $100 extra, and she kind of started crying and freaking out a little bit, and I didn't know what to do. So I said, God bless you, and I left. And Robert came out and says, hey, when we got here, she was saying that they needed $100 to fix something. And I didn't know that. You know what I mean? So to bless others is our ability just to say yes to God and do the You know, we may not understand it, we may not agree with the decisions that have been made. You go to certain countries and you'll be like, that is wrong. You're like, no, it isn't. That is not wrong. You know what I mean? I'm not talking about any moral act, I'm just talking about the living, just the way they live it, right? The things that they use, right? I've been in other countries where the Americans are like, ew, we're not eating that, but this family went and cooked their best dish. Now you're just insulted. It's different. If it's our responsibility to represent God as best we can in all circumstances, right? Turn the other cheek. Right? Some of us are like, I'm not turning the other cheek, I'm not on that. Right? Time after time again, Jesus touched the untouchable. Right? He worked with people that had leprosy. He worked with people that had diseases. In fact, then, because we don't understand it, like, I don't know what that is, but it was so with you know, the things. Do you guys realize that you could actually touch somebody with leprosy and not get it? Did you know that? Well, I wasn't sure of that until I was a kid yet, and I prayed for it, and it had leprosy, and I actually touched his feet, and I started to get blood after it. Something was going on. It was leprosy. But when they don't understand that, what is that? What? I don't remember now. It was 15 when I went. I could probably look up. But what I did is I touched his feet, prayed for him. It's the answer to do that. It's easy, pretty miracles that we can hear. So, why is that? Right? My commentary is because we should have done. That final sentence. We were, Bruce and I were talking about, you know, why is it that when people come out of certain situations, this is the case, we're talking about being sex trafficking. But why is it Americans, when they come out of a situation, don't, let me try this, if you go to a country like Thailand, and a female gets put in sex, right? And then she gets saved out of sex trafficking. There's one thing. She gets saved out of sex trafficking. Then you get a missionary person that puts them in his house, redeems them, gets them back, and then teaches them some type of skill, like how to, you know, make hot cocoa and a bun, and then they go open up a business, right? Why are they so eager to go open up a business when in America you do the same thing with that person and they don't go do that? Now, this is my observation from my time in Bible, is because this person doesn't have any other alternative, right? If they don't do this, they starve. Nobody's going to take care of it. In America, we're like, look, oh, you use heroin and meth? Sure, here, just like we have, right? They have the opportunity to take care of it so there's no incentive, right? So they live in this poverty mindset that you can't get out of. That's my observation, whether it's true or not. I see. service flows from his heart. His teaching for how to take care of others. We should have the same heart as Jesus and follow what he taught. Okay? If he's to be an expert in the scriptures, that's probably knowledge what that means, right? Expert, that's yeah. But I think what he teaches us most is that compassion and empathy. He wants us to go out and represent him the best we can. When you are in the marketplace, there's another one of you guys. You are representing God on a regular basis. And unlike me, that I go to Taco Bell bar and have one moment, or Starbucks, where every Sunday it's the same guy who says for me and right? But those are limited contact. When you're around people all the time, and you don't ever have to share the gospel because they're going to see the gospel in you. Right? Unless you're totally silent and you're not representing God at all. But they're going to know. I do believe that. And at times, really nothing to say that at some point, because it's part of you. It's not what you do, it's who you are. Right? You are a Christ follower. You don't go through Christianity, you are Christianity. Right? So therefore, you're representing him at your workplace, and do that with your actions more than your words. And I believe that we get Father first. True servant doesn't just work.